Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at another short Latin story. Now this is called Dancing Horses, and like the other ones I've been doing in this series, it's coming from H.J. Hardy's Latin Reader for the lower forms in schools. Now if you haven't used this before, haven't watched any of these videos, or this is your first time seeing a story from Hardy, it's a little bit sort of deceptive, I think, the name he uses, because what he's calling the lower forms is not necessarily what I would call a lower form of Latin in sort of a high school or middle school in today's times. These stories are probably best for a student who's had some Latin before and has seen some more advanced topics, things like subjunctive. So maybe in that Latin 2 or 3 range. Again, if you call it the lower forms, that's fine. I wouldn't necessarily think of it as sort of beginner stories, but they do have a lot of really interesting stories in there where some of them are based on history, some of them are myth, some of them have sort of a moral point to them. This one is sort of a mix of everything. It is a story. About a city, which we're going to see, and sort of the inhabitants having these dancing horses, like the chapter says, or the name of the chapter says. So it's sort of a blend of history and ancient Greek myth, which just makes it something interesting. So I say in all these videos, these stories from Hardy are just a great way to break out from a traditional textbook or curriculum with something you've never seen. If you're a student, you just want to test your skills on something new, these are great. If you're a teacher, sometimes these are great to use just to mix it up with your students. That's how I use them. I just work them in just as something different, so my students don't necessarily get stuck with the stories, the same old stories over and over again. So before you dive too far into this and work your way through, what I would encourage you to do is, if you can find someone to read this to, read this to. I always say in these videos, reading this aloud and speaking it and working on your pronunciation is always a great thing. And if you're a student, you can find a classmate to do this with, and they can read it back to you so you can work on your listening skills. These are always really great ways to actually understand the language. So I'd encourage that. The other thing I do is recommend that you use what we call the read and reread method, right? So read through it once, write down any problem areas you might have, vocab, grammar, whatever it is. When you're done with that first read, look them up and then keep doing that over and over again, right? Making a list and working your problem areas until you're able to read through this without needing any help, any grammar or anything like that, any vocab. That's how you know you've really understood it. That's always a great tactic for reading Latin. So as we dive in here, if you haven't done that yet, pause the video. Go work on your own and then come back and use this as a double check. Not that, my translations are ever anything amazing, but still, it should give you a little bit of a guidepost so you can make sure you're on the right track. I'll read through the story once and then I'll pause it, and then we'll kind of continue from there and work through the translation. So let's start up. The story looks like this, and it goes: Equos inter Sibaritas tradunt esse institutos ut inter epulas tibiarum numeros saltarent. Quod cum crotoniate cognovissent bello adversos eos incepto tubarum sonitum aliosque, qui ad arma animos excitarent, clamores silere iuserent. Tibias vero et tibicines secum in acie adductos, cum iam hostes propios adessent, produxit crotoniates dux isque imperavit, ut numeros ad saltandum aptos caneret. Quibus auditis, Sibaritarum equitanquam in mediis convivis versati, equitibus excusis saltare et trepudiare inceperant, et confuso Sibaritarum ordine stragis cladisque causa fuerunt suis dominis. Okay, so there's a lot going on there. But pause the video there, right? If you want to listen to it again, feel free. But what we're going to do right now is kind of work our way through and make sure that we're understanding the story and the translation. But again, if you haven't done this work on your own, just pause here for a second, go do it, and use the rest of the video as sort of a double check. Okay, so the story starts like this. We had Equos inter Sibaritas, right? So this is our introduction to the people of Sybaris, right? Which is a real place. So I mentioned at the beginning of this video, there is some history here. So Sybaris is in the southern toe of Italy, not quite the toe, but sort of between the heel and the toe, and it's an ancient Greek city. Okay, so what we would call Magna Graecia. Okay, so I guess in Hardy's read, you'd call them the Sybarites, I guess, the people of Sybaris. So it's saying here that they say that there were among the Sybarites, right, inter Sybaritas, there were horses, equos, okay? And they were horses that they, trained horses rather, right, institutos equos. So trained horses, and it's said that they danced, right, saltarant, that the horses danced between the courses, inter epulas, and that's like dinner courses, right, of a banquet. They dance to the numeros tibiarum, right, to the rhythms or songs of flutes. Okay, so this is where we get into sort of mythology and just fun storytelling. But again, real place and a sort of a real myth about them. The idea was that they trained their horses to dance, right? So if you brought out a flute, the horses would start dancing at dinner. Then you have quod cum crotoniatae, right? So when the people of Croton, right? Croton is another famous city, and they're at war with each other, right? So they're neighbors, right? So Croton is another place in Magna Graecia, a Greek settlement right near Sybaris, by the way. So they were fighting with each other. Okay, so I guess the Crotonites. I don't even know how you'd say that. I'm stumbling over it. Right, the people of Croton, right, the Crotoniati in this line. So when they had learned of this, meaning the flutes, right, and with war having been started against them, right? So you have the bello in Kepta, right, with war having been started at Versuseus against them. So they're having a war going on. Okay, they ordered, right? You go to the end for Euceront here. They ordered the sound of trumpets, the sonatum tubarum, and other shouts. You'd probably say alios clamores, right? Other shouts, which would so the qui there is referring back to those things, which would sort of excitare, like rouse up the mind to arms, ad arma. So it's saying that they ordered that trumpets and the other shouting, right, the other shouts that would get the soldiers kind of riled up and ready to fight, they ordered them to be silent, right, silere. So in other words, they're not having any trumpets, they're not having any shouts, right? The guys aren't sort of, the soldiers aren't riling themselves up for battle, they're just having quiet, right, which is a little different. Okay. Then you have Tibias Vera, right? So indeed, the leader of the Crotonites, right? The Dux Crotoniates in this line, right? So the leader revealed flutes, right, and flute players. So you have the tibias and the tibicines, right? So flutes and flute players having been led into battle, right? Adductos inacie, having been led into battle with him or with them. So all of a sudden they're in the middle of the war, the battle. They pause, and here come the flute and the flute players. Okay. Then you have when the enemy, right? Cum iam hostes. So when the enemy was already kind of close approprius, right, nearby. So when the enemy's very close, the leader produced it, right? He produced or kind of revealed these flutes and flute players. Okay. Now, why did he do this? He did it so that they might play songs, right? So caneret, right? So he ordered them. So again, he revealed the flute players, and then he's going to order them to play, right? So he did this so that they might play the songs suitable for dancing, the numeros, right? Ad saltandum aptos, right? The songs suitable for dancing. So they're playing dancing songs on their flutes. So you can already kind of see where this is going. The leader of the Crotons, right? He understands that the Sybarites, right? That they have these horses that dance. So he's going to play some songs to make the horses dance right in the middle of the battle. Then you end with this part here. You have quibus auditis, right? So with these things having been heard, meaning the songs, then you have sibaritarum equi tanquam in medias convivus versati, right? So the horses of the Sybarites, right? The equi sibaritarum, right? They began to dance and jump around, right? So saltare and tripudiare kind of mean the same thing, right? Inciperant is your beginning. So it means that they're jumping around and dancing is kind of the idea, as if they're in medias convivus, in the middle of like a dinner party, right, in the middle of banquets. So they're doing the exact same thing that they had done back in the day. Okay, so then you have with the cavalry having been sort of thrown around. Okay, so this creates a problem, right? Obviously, you have the equitibus, right? The cavalry excusis. They're thrown off by this because the horses start dancing. And you have with the ordine Sibaritarum confuso, with the order of the Sybarites confused, meaning their battle line, everything's kind of confused because the horses are now starting to dance. They were the cause, right? So you have fuerant causa, so they were the cause of the slaughter and the disaster. So stragis cladisque, the slaughter and disaster for their own masters. So the fuerant there is talking about the horses, right? The dancing horses were the cause of disaster for their masters. So in other words, they have these horses that they train to dance. Their enemies show up and start playing flute songs to make the horses dance. And now everyone's getting killed because instead of kind of riding and fighting, the horses are dancing. All right. So again, this is a fun little story. Again, based on a historical, not necessarily a historical event, but they're historical places, right? Cerberus and Croton. They did fight each other, and we do have these reports of sort of the horses that were. Dancing and taught to dance. I think it's Athenaeus is where they're getting Hardy's getting this story from. But again, it's just a fun little story, little anecdote, just to mix up your Latin a little bit. So if you have any questions at all, feel free to put them in the comments below. I know I did that quickly and kind of leave it for you to just kind of read through. But if you have a problem with the translation or a question, anything, of course, put it. I'm happy to help you. But otherwise, keep at it. Use this as just another story, another thing to mix into your Latin learning, something different to break away from your traditional textbook, and use it as a chance to keep on reading and learning, right? Just with something new. Good luck with it.